You are an explorer, and the greatest good you can do is to bring back a new idea, because our world is endangered by the absence of good ideas. Our world is in crisis because of the absence of consciousness. No one understands consciousness, what it is or how it works. And no one understands quantum mechanics, what it is or how it works. At least not really. Coincidence? I think not. All right, I guess that's it. We're done here. You can go home and we'll see you next time. Okay, but like really, what the heckerdoodle is going on with consciousness and quantum mechanics? Last time we touched on the subject, we discussed how ideas like quantum mysticism and consciousness generally have been met with skepticism and disapproval because of their common association with woo. But today, I want to ask that we put aside our preconceptions for a moment and open our minds to understanding the different approaches to the nature of consciousness. The so-called hard problem of consciousness was coined by David Chalmers in 1995. He said that the most puzzling question in the scientific approach to consciousness is how our conscious minds can experience unique sensations like colors, tastes, and sounds. Let's take chocolate as an example. The question here is, how does chocolate end up in your brain as the taste of chocolate? Now, we understand that our tongue has several thousand taste buds and our nose is full of olfactory sensory neurons. And the delicious noms that you're enjoying will play these different cells like a little molecular piano in your nose and mouth. The moment you eat that chocolate, the neurons and all that stuff works together to transmit the information into an electrical signal that gets shot into your brain, which then somehow is translated into the legendary taste of chocolate. Sounds simple, right? But here's what's interesting. We don't see chemical info about chocolate scrolling across our eyes like a robot when we eat it, but rather we experience it as a unified sensation. I mean, some chocolate is so good, it'll send tingles up your spine. And that's the real kicker, because we don't yet know how matter, chemistry, sugar, or anything goes from being just an electrical signal in the brain to the actual experience and taste of the thing. While we all exist, we have no idea why or how our brain converts these things into experiences that we feel. Sensations like this are called qualia, which are defined as individual instances of subjective conscious experience. We perceive them as one experience, eating chocolate, but in fact, all of the ingredients are experienced together as a product of our consciousness, and science just can't explain why. In fact, almost every line of thought on the relationship of consciousness to physics runs into deep trouble. So much so that any notion of consciousness in the mind is often relegated to the realm of metaphysics or philosophy, or, spiritual mumbo jumbo. The other side of it is stuff like emotions. We all know what an emotion is, unless you're a psychopath. But they're so interesting because when we live unconsciously, we often embody our emotions and almost become them, like wearing a suit made of them. But with meditative practice or working with a psychologist, we find that we may become the observer of our emotions and realize that they are not us. Oh, but that's not to say it's bad necessarily to embody your emotions. When you experience them so deeply and fully within you that it moves you to tears, it can be one of the most transcendent and transformative experiences. And then, of course, there's also this kind of emotional embodiment. In other words, we can't be beings made from emotions, since through meditation we can observe them from somewhere within us. This even rings true for the concept of the physical body, and it makes us wonder about conscious locality. It's because we see through our eyes that we often take for granted that our viewpoint of the world is in our heads. But there's a simple yet mysterious question here. If we are consciousness within or existing through a body, where in the body are we? Where is our awareness actually located? Today, most people in the mainstream believe consciousness resides in the brain. Even the 17th century philosopher René Descartes argued that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul, the place where the realms of thought and feeling intersected with the physical brain. In theory, if the brain was exclusively made of neurons and physical material, then we should be able to recreate or model its processes in an AI and have it work exactly like a normal brain, right? After all, we can write AI algorithms that work via machine learning, neural networks, and deep learning, which can model all the neurons almost exactly in an artificial brain. But it isn't complete. There's a missing piece in the AI puzzle. It can't make informed decisions or apply meaning to data. This has led some scientists to invoke quantum physics to explain the missing piece. Even though quantum consciousness is widely shot down as mystical woo-woo, it just won't go away. Most of us are probably familiar with the double slit experiment and even the misconception that consciousness causes the wave collapse. It's well known that the experiment shows particles exhibiting an interference pattern with superpositioning and then self-canceling the moment that they're measured. The thing is, in the 70s, physicists came up with another experiment called
the Delayed Choice Quantum Eraser.
It uses some crazy engineering to make measurements on the paths of photons, light particles, but only after they should have chosen whether to take one path or a superposition of multiple. You'd think we could catch Mother Nature out here, but no. It turns out that, just as Niels Bohr predicted, it makes no difference whether we delay the measurement or not. As long as we measure the photon's path before its arrival at a detector, we still lose the interference pattern. In other words, it's almost as if the particle knows not only when we're looking at it, but also when we're about to look at it. The delayed choice experiment implies that the sheer act of noticing, rather than any physical disturbance, can cause the collapse. That's what led some physicists early on, like Eugene Wigner, to assume that the wave nature of particles was somehow interacting with our own consciousness. Naturally, it was slow to get off the ground, but in recent years, this idea that there are quantum processes going on in the brain has gained some weight. And don't worry, honey, that weight looks great on you. Now, material sciences will suggest that just because a quantum process is happening doesn't mean that there's spiritual meaning there. But I want to invite the possibility here today that what if becoming aware consciously of quantum processes is a spiritual experience? Spiritual or mystical experiences are often felt as being connected to something else, or everything around you, or within you as a whole, in a holistic sort of way. Perhaps becoming more consciously aware of or embodying these quantum processes is a natural state or experience that we may describe as spiritual. Practically speaking, if proof of the spiritual can be found at all, it will likely be found in the quantum field theory, which aligns heavily with what the great scientist Schrödinger believed, and even what the Upanishads spoke about in ancient India. And to be fair, while today we're talking about the brain, we also know that the heart is 100 times stronger electrically and 1,000 times stronger magnetically than the brain. And perhaps embodying that electromagnetic field as an experience is the quote unquote spiritual experience. Back to the brain though. To understand it well, we can relate it with quantum computers today. Quantum computing is revolutionary because most computers can only identify two possible states, 0 and 1. The binary code found at the foundation of modern tech. But quantum computing takes that to a new level, where points of data can occupy both 0 and 1 together. The reason it's called quantum computing is because quantum objects can also be in two places at once. So then with the brain, is this the same process of our ability to hold onto two mutually exclusive ideas at the same time? Arguably the most famous person to suggest this quantum mind theory is Roger Penrose, professor of math at Oxford and one of the mentors of Stephen Hawking. He put forth that there are molecular structures in our brains that are able to alter their state in response to a single quantum event, which means that quantum superpositions have something to do with the way neurons are triggered to communicate via electrical signals. Basically, there are quantum processes responsible for how or where the neurons fire in our brains, which of course affect how we perceive reality. He called this theory OR-core, and it argues that gravity is the reason that decoherence, a fancy word for when something stops behaving quantum and starts behaving normally, and thus we don't see that weird quantum behavior on large scales. He believed that the main carriers of quantum brain activity are these tiny protein strands called microtubules. And in 2013, a study by the National Institute of Material Science in Japan found that quantum vibrations did actually occur inside microtubules, which Penrose argues supports his theory. Now, it's still not 100% though, and there are a couple issues with the idea. Scientifically speaking, we can't say that consciousness comes from the quantum world. I mean, who knows? Perhaps consciousness is even beyond the quantum world, informing it from a realm of pure thought that we can't even perceive just yet. Today, Orkor has made a few biological predictions that did turn out to be wrong and isn't an accepted model of brain physiology in mainstream science at the moment. Further, the quantum mind theory relies on the weird and wonderful phenomena of entanglement, where the two particles are bound together in strange and mysterious ways. The thing is, entanglement also collapses with decoherence, and since the neural networks in the brain are quite complicated, with ions flying around all over the place, the environment of our brain just can't support anything like entanglement long enough for it to have an effect. See, neurons fire out at milliseconds in the brain, and in order for quantum behavior to be possible there, quantum effects would have to be measured in femtoseconds. That's 1 trillion times faster than a millisecond. That said though, like Schrodinger's cat, the idea of the cat in the box occupying both states of dead and alive at the same time until checked, we could think of the act of making a decision in our life as similar to having a superposition of multiple states of decision outcomes. So that making a decision means opening the box to reduce the brain from a combination of possible states to one single state. This idea doesn't violate quantum mechanics and is technically possible, so maybe there is something to be said about the brain being in multiple states of cognition and consciousness at once. From a spiritual perspective, this could change how we view the subject of manifestation. Consider that, like in the many worlds interpretation, every conceivable reality exists at any moment, which means there are multiple realities where the thing that you want to manifest already exists. Perhaps our consciousness is in a kind of superposition-like state, where we're existing in a multidimensional form. That means that once we make the decision to do something and direct our energy towards that goal, perhaps we jump or phase into that reality, and our mind somehow picks that state of being to settle in. Of course, this is all speculation, and we'll never know for sure until we find experimental proof of quantum consciousness. The physical mechanistic worldview is the current bedrock on which modern science is founded. But with that comes a pretty big limitation. We have designed a system based solely on material reality. And what this means is that when we design new experiments exploring reality, we can only do so from a materialistic point of view, which is fine. I mean, you can do that, I guess. I mean, if you like duality consciousness and separating yourself from universal oneness, that's cool, I guess. How can we expect to prove something non-physical if the tools and methods that we use are only suitable for physical work? Just because we have no way of studying something at the moment doesn't mean it doesn't exist, and denying it purely on the grounds that we can't study it is wildly unscientific. It's probably more accurate to say that we simply don't know how to conceptualize that which we don't understand and aren't even certain of its existence collectively just yet. That kind of view is something called methodological agnosticism, and it's something we need a lot more of today. Less rigidness in thinking and more of a, but let's find out kind of mindset. Plus, it's not like there aren't literally billions of people who have reported mystical or spiritual experiences and connections with otherworldly or even earthly non-physical forces, whether it's deities, nature spirits, or even aliens. Are human beings just insane, or is there something much bigger going on? Remember, just as esoteric philosophy tells us that we are consciousness experiencing itself, so too does physics tell us that we are atoms and particles observing themselves. It seems they're really not so different after all. Toodles!